Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us in another episode of Building Family Resiliency, Community Voices, Community Perspectives. My name is Deb Ottman, and I am the host for this podcast series. Today, I am so delighted to have with us two professionals that work with the Center for Inclusive Childcare, the Executive Director of CICC, Priscilla Weigel, and one of the inclusion coaches that works across childcare settings, both center-based and family-based childcare, Pam Walz. And these two professionals are going to talk to us a little bit today about building resiliency, not only in families and kids, but also in the caregivers that are tasked with supporting children's development. So first of all, let's start this out by, I'm wondering, what does resiliency mean to the two of you from where you stand in your position in the field?
Well, I think I'll take the first part of that and relate it to our organization as a support system for early childhood professionals out there providing care to children. We provide different types of coaching. We provide inclusion coaching, health and safety coaching, and infant toddler coaching. And for us to be resilient during this pandemic and to support resiliency was really to look at how we can shift gears and bounce back when we were hit with the idea of, we're typically face-to-face on site in childcare settings supporting them. And during a pandemic, we couldn't do that. So we had to completely regroup and just really changed our model. We really did show resiliency because we had to. We were forced to do it.
Absolutely. That was such a heavy lift on all fronts. Just the idea of going from that face-to-face setting, which supports relationship building, and moving to a virtual delivery system had to have been just a huge game changer for all of you. Pam, how do you view resiliency?
Well, I think I would add to what Priscilla has mentioned, in that I feel like we had a parallel process because as we were doing that at CICC as a team, we were also watching and supporting and figuring out how to support childcare programs and early childhood environments in the same process, having to completely change the model of how they're doing things and take a lot of new factors into consideration and modify how they were doing things. So I think we kind of had a parallel process happening there. And I think that's true in many, many arenas due to COVID. But I really think about resiliency as our ability to be able to recover after a difficult or an adverse experience. So kind of our ability to be able to bounce back after having challenging circumstances happen. So I guess that's kind of the framework of how I think about resiliency.
That's a great way of looking at it. And one of the things that, as I've heard both of you speak a little bit, and I myself use the word inclusion coaching. And so this is an element that CICC focuses on. Can you share with us what you mean by inclusion coaching as opposed to the typical early childhood coaching that we talk about?
Well, I'll say that from our perspective, it's really about relationship-based support that's on site, ideally, which now we've noted that it is virtual. But our coaches really use the lens of healthy social emotional development and accessibility for all, so that all children feel included, feel that they belong, feel that their needs are being met. And our coaches really support early childhood professionals, those childcare providers, in understanding what each individual child needs. And then in turn from that point saying, how can we help maybe a child who has a diagnosis, maybe a child who has a developmental delay or lag, who hasn't been diagnosed yet, or maybe there's a child who's having some challenges related to behavior or just not having the ideal day. And so our coaches come in and really help look at all of those factors and then help that professional providing care understand that whatever they're doing to support that one child that may be having difficulty will in turn support the entire class.
Wow, I so appreciate this framing that you are both bringing to looking at development, particularly these very early years of development within the context of relationship. And Pam, you mentioned parallel process, the idea of how our own behaviors and experiences then in turn impact other relationships that we may have, which ultimately are going to be felt and visited upon these very little ones that we're all trying to hold in the center of our work. And that is such it's such a mindful approach to looking at, thinking about, and wondering about what typical development might look like, what might be impacting that. As you mentioned, Priscilla, just it could be something as little as having a bad day, or there may be other things at play here that, you know, may be deeper and longer lasting. Which is contributing to what the caregivers and then the coaches in turn are seeing. So as you think about that and these challenges that both your organization and then in turn the caregivers that you are supporting, the challenges they were facing, from your perspectives, what do you see as the challenges that maybe most impacted the children that were going to childcare?
So I think we really want to be thinking about that from a couple different lenses. I think we want to be thinking about it from a family lens and what has all what's been the experience of the family and what's impacted their world through all of this, and also from the lens of our childcare programs. So in thinking about it from both lenses, because both have a significant impact on supporting children and helping them to thrive in their environments, you know, I think us just thinking about everything that families have held this past year in changes in their work environments, many parents working from home while they picked up responsibilities of supporting virtual learning for older siblings, and extra caregiving responsibilities for their younger children, financial challenges that families have faced this past year with changes within their employment or unemployment due to COVID's impact, you know, economically on businesses, and then also, you know, trickle down effects of, you know, many families couldn't access those extended support networks that they typically have. I heard many childcare programs talking about just the impact of parents and not being able to access grandparents for backup childcare or for a break on the weekend. And so there were a lot of extra pressures for many families to hold. And all those extra pressures create some extra stress on that family system. And so it's been a lot for families to hold this past year. Some families have thrived, and it's been wonderful for them to have some extended time unplanned with their children or with their family.
Yes.
And for many families, there have been added stressors. So we've seen a wide range of how that's been for families. And I think for our childcare programs, just thinking about, you know, some of the challenges that they faced during this pandemic experience of managing ever-changing enrollment. And so, you know, having some families during the stay-at-home order that, you know, totally withdrew from childcare, and then having to be thoughtful in supporting children with returning and being very intentional about how they've done that. So it's been successful. Some families have had children come in and out, you know, leaving and returning multiple times because of changes in employment factors for them. So there's been lots of ever evolving changes that childcare has responded to this past year. even thinking about pieces of just learning and implementing the health and safety standards, and adjusting to this new term of decision tree that's kind of become their Bible in the past year and
Yes.
a half, and wanting to do that well, because they really want to ensure safety for the children, and for centers wanting to ensure safety for their staff, and family childcare wanting to ensure safety for their own families within their work environment. So lots of pieces that they've all held with managing some of those enrollment changes, financial changes, implementing new policies about how are we going to handle things when we have to do a 2-week quarantine. And we have to, in a family childcare, that can mean closing the entire program for 2 weeks. In a center-based program, that means closing a classroom for an entire 2 weeks. And so all these ebbs and flows of thinking about what policies are fair and equitable for the child care program, what policies are fair and equitable for families that repeatedly are ending up managing some of these types of circumstances. So there's I think looking at it from both lenses is kind of an important piece, because there have been really big changes that both environments, families and childcare, have had to hold and adapt to this past year.
It strikes me as I listen to you as the coach that is supporting both the child care providers and then hopefully also providing support by extension to the families and children. It occurs to me the multiple competing priorities you needed to hold and the perspectives of each of these, because for instance, the impact of employment or enrollment and how that impacted profitability, it would, I imagine, create such unintended consequences then in other areas. And I would imagine now, as you begin to see the world opening up to something with, I don't know that we'll ever have the typical model back, or the model that we've all, had been accustomed to prior to COVID. But as you see things opening up again, you see children returning back to either their center-based or family-based care settings. What are some of the things that you hold concern about, Pam, that families may be continuing to struggle with, or that you could see as potential problem areas that may really impact that ability to bounce back and recover?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different twist on that, because I think things we'll have to be thinking about, or we'll want to be really thinking about and thoughtful of, are really working on building supportive relationships, and being able to bridge the needs of families, as we think about that there will probably continue to be moving parts this fall and this winter. And so really thinking about, what are some of those supportive relationships that families can rely on as they're still in the middle of some of, this return to normal, or whatever the new sense of normal will be. Just really being thoughtful about how do we support our families in providing supportive relationships for them, helping them to think about, are there other community resources or access to other support systems that we can help connect them to in the work that we're doing, so that we're helping to build in extra buffers and extra opportunities for them to continue being resilient through all of this, so that they have a little bit of a buffer system and support system. So I think those are some pieces that I think are really important, as well as just making space for thinking about what are some of the needs what are some of the questions that parents might be thinking about, and how can we be proactive in thinking about, what is our model for fall going to look like? Are there additional changes coming? If there are, how do we put out supportive, helpful communication to parents and be as transparent as possible to make sure that they're having the information they need? Because I think in all those things, it helps to provide a stronger foundation of support, and a little bit feeling like there's a little bit more to stand on and feel comfortable with.
I appreciate so much the fact that you are looking at this starting with the foundation of relationships and looking at how we support that, which in turn then gives people that internal fortitude and the feeling of self-efficacy that they can manage these additional stresses. So you've talked about building and supporting those relationships. Can you give us some examples of what that might look like in practice? So what might a caregiver do when in relationship with a family? And you also, I heard you mention, for example, the area of communications. What might be some applied strategies that that a caregiver could use when working with a family or a parent or whatever that, maybe it's, grandma who's doing the primary caregiving. What might they be doing to support that primary caregiver in that relationship?
I think some of those pieces are making space for conversations,
Mm-hmm.
for parents to be comfortable coming with questions, so that there's space to be able to have some of those important conversations, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to offer the suggestions or recommendations for other resources that might be helpful to the family. I think some of that is kind of that starting place, of just having, I think, working to build those strong relationships so that some of those conversations can happen. I think about other pieces like our early care environments being able to do soft handoffs. So, if a family does have a specific challenge that they might be working their way through, not that our early childhood environments, have the capacity for social work, but
Mm-hmm.
in a way, they oftentimes do, do know of or are aware of community resources that might be available to families, or connecting with, United Way, or early childhood family education, or some of those additional supports that our families might need for just a little bit of extra stability right now. And so being able to hold those relationships with those families and offer some of those soft handoffs can be incredibly helpful for parents. In some ways, our caregiving environments are co-regulators for our parents to know that they're not alone, that they don't need to be alone in their parenting journey.
I really, I love the idea and the fact that you brought up that so much of how we support a relationship starts with how we present ourselves to a parent or to a caregiver, in that we remain open and respectful, whatever the needs or questions are. The idea of holding space for those questions and concerns, and then finally being able to respond with actual practicable actions a family can take. And one of the things that I think about, especially given what our project is all about, is that idea of early identification. Um, I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you recommend, or what might you be thinking about when maybe a caregiver hasn't seen a child in person for the last 12, 18 months, and that child returns, and we're beginning to see maybe some concerns in behavior, or maybe we're seeing a lag in some of the developmental domains. What would you suggest that caregivers do in instances like that? Is it something that you think we should be taking a wait and see approach? Or do you think that there are other things that a caregiver might suggest to a family?
That's a great question. I think that, coming from the place of being such a strong advocate for early intervention, I would always advocate that, that we really take a look at that particular situation, what's happening for that particular child. And when we have questions or suspect that there might be some delay, Help Me Grow is such a wonderful resource. I think that programs can so easily walk through, partnering with parents and having a conversation around, maybe this is just a piece that we bring in some additional, I hate to say experts, some additional informed individuals to help us
Yes.
just think about, what is happening. Is there the possibility that some early intervention might be helpful? I think Help Me Grow is such a great resource. And I think even the possibility of being able to pull in, if a program is unsure about whether a referral would be helpful right now, I think it's so great for them when they do pull in the CICC team and pull in one of our coaches to be able to walk alongside of them in thinking about that, in looking at, where the current functioning is for that particular child, and then what some next steps might be good to look at or helpful to think about, because it's just helpful to have a partner in the process.
Yeah. Again, that idea of relationship, that we are not alone and none of us are alone, and that there are other resources and people to whom we can come with our questions. And I really, I appreciate you saying always err on the side of a screening, or at the very least beginning an inquiry, so that people who really know early development and are able to suss out whatever they may be seeing, and knowing if further assessment is needed is such an important tip. I really appreciate you bringing that up. And so one of the other things then that I'm hearing you mention is what a terrific resource we in Minnesota have. We have CICC. I think that we are really unique as a state in that we have people like yourselves based throughout the entire state who can support caregiving facilities and family-based care, and the fact that we have Help Me Grow, and Help Me Connect, which is a place that people can look to when they're looking to find these additional agencies and resources that may help supplement what they're seeing. So I want to go back a little bit to supporting, the idea of supporting, and I think of our little people who are, who maybe have been home with mom or dad or auntie for this whole time, which we know has been a tremendous stress on perhaps the family, but that child has really become accustomed to only being with mom or dad, and isn't accustomed to being in this care setting, and they may not remember the last time. They're too young to really recall what that was like. Do you have any suggestions about how families and caregivers can help a child transition back into care and booster that child's resiliency, in learning that they can do well and they can succeed in this new environment?
Some things that come to mind for me are pieces like, being able to allow that transition a little bit over time can be a really big change for a child from, having had the opportunity to be home with a primary caregiver for a long length of time, and then start back in a care environment and, just have to make that adjustment at 40 or 50 hours per week. I think when possible, I think it can be really helpful to maybe even think about kind of titrating that in smaller increments, a couple weeks, to just allow a little bit more time and space for relationship building to happen between that child care provider and that child again, so that there's a little bit more foundation there to make that adjustment if a family does need the child to go back to full-time care. I also think about things like opportunities for building that home and childcare connection. So perhaps there are some pieces from the childcare environment. Maybe it's a book of, these are all my friends in my classroom or, in my program, that the child can learn to, get familiar with those children even outside of the childcare environment, if that's something that a program is able to work out all the logistics of privacy and those types of things to be able to share, or even if it's just about the caregiver, that particular childcare provider or early childhood teacher, and sharing a little bit of information of pictures about our classroom and our caregivers, and just some of those things that are going to help to build a little bit of relationship even when the child's not in that environment. And also, I think being willing to allow some of those attachment pieces in our early childhood environments, in our childcare environments, favorite blankets or a special stuffy friend that can allow that child a little bit of that safety and sense of security while they're adjusting to their new environment. And then there's connection building, activities. Sometimes simple things like encouraging the parents and the child to have some rituals around drop off. How many hugs do we give? How many kisses do we give? Do we have any kind of, depending on the age of the child, any kind of special rituals that we can include in those drop offs to make them go a little bit easier for both primary caregivers and for the child as well, to just help bridge that transition back. Priscilla, if you have additional things that you've heard other coaches share too, please.
Well, and those are fabulous suggestions and ideas, Pam. And I think that the key thing that's streaming through everything you're saying is that whole piece of communication that's so important in partnership with the family, the childcare professional, the person caring for that child, is really setting the stage for success when they start with full communication of, here's our routine, here's what your child can expect, here's what you can expect as a parent, here's how we can support you in your role and how we can partner with you. And Pam, when we were talking about this beforehand, Pam had noted something that is really a good reminder for all of us, that many young children have spent their whole life in a pandemic, or some half of their life. But it's been when you look at those little lives and how many years they've spent on Earth,
Right.
The pandemic has really monopolized what their memories are. And so giving that time that Pam is suggesting of just easing back in is so important. I think instead of expecting that there's going to be this flip of a switch and everything's going to be back to normal for this child, understanding that they're going to take some adjustment.
Yeah, and I really, gosh, Priscilla, I so appreciate you bringing up the point that these little people, they haven't had the many years we adults have had to build up those skills and to be able to flip those switches quite as quickly and be regulated in the process. They really depend on the adults in their lives to help them regulate and to help them make those transitions until they have internalized that ability on their own. And I think that is such a critical and lovely reminder for us that these little ones need us they need the scaffolding of the adults and those relationships in their life to be able to learn how to have this skill. And especially in light of the fact that many of them have spent the majority of their lives now, in light of, these 18 months that we've been home, that they haven't had that opportunity. And even if they had that opportunity, they may have forgotten a lot of those skills, and they need time to build those back up. And the other thing that I think about as I heard you talk, Priscilla, is this idea of communication. And so it's not only childcare providers that can be communicating with families and providing them information, it's also really a critical responsibility for families to be sharing what's happening at home, maybe what they may have been seeing with their particular child. We know each child is so different in how they approach a new situation, how they learn, what they need. Pam, I love the idea of sending along transitional objects that are near and dear to that child. I remember even when one of my guys, he always had a hard time after summer break. And when he had to go back to first grade and be there full time, we pasted pictures of me and him together, and then a couple more of the family, so that when he was feeling lonely, he could just flip open his pencil case and see the two of us together. Mm-hmm. And that was that was our message, that you are always pictured in my mind, even if you're not here with me. And so it's finding those things that work for your particular child. So I think that is such a sensitive and loving approach. And I really appreciate hearing those tips. So we've talked about how we can support families, some of the applied techniques. As you think about this and we begin to bring this conversation to a close, what do you two feel are the most important things that you would like parents and families to know in the face of returning to this new normal?
As I think about that, and I think about just what we've heard among the childcare community throughout the past year and a half, and how amazing families have been about just modifying and accommodating for all of the different pieces that come up. I feel like at some point we just really need to say to parents, like, we see you.
Yes.
We see how hard you're working. We see the important difference that you're trying to make. And we also don't want you to have to do that alone. One of the pieces that I love about the Center for Inclusive Childcare is that it doesn't have to be the childcare provider that reaches out for extra support for a child. It can be the parent. Mm-hmm. And so really empowering parents to continue being advocates for your child and reaching out to help and support along that journey, because there are a lot of great avenues, I think, in the state of Minnesota for parents to be supported in that process. So those are a few pieces that come to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I agree, Pam, wholeheartedly, of course. And I just think that in that relationship building process, all of us at the CICC really try to help parents understand that we are here not to tell them how things should go, but to really come alongside them as a partner in what are you needing now, what are you needing today, and we do the same thing with the childcare professional as well, so that we are there. As one of the analogies that we say often is that we carry in hope, and that's our job. We carry in hope so that tomorrow will be a better day, whatever that means. That's what we're here to provide in our support, in our coaching, in our listening ear, in our compassion. That's really the focus and our goal. And so when you come to the table with that, it's really amazing what can happen when you all work together with that child at the center, with those other things around.
The idea of hope and compassion, I think that it's something we need to not only give to others, but to ourselves.
Mhm.
and to recognize that this has just been a tough year all around. I also appreciate the idea, Pam, that you've brought in so many infant mental health principles, which work, when we talk about infant mental health, all we're really talking about is how we support healthy social and emotional development. And the idea that we can't support little ones without supporting the adults in their lives. And I always think about the idea that kids will be fine and they'll develop as they are meant to develop if the adults in their lives are fine. And they are capable of accessing the supports they need to help support their child in turn. And that is exactly what the Center for Inclusive Childcare does in all aspects. And the work that you and your team do is, I'm just very proud that we have a center like yours here in the state. And I'm hoping as we bring this to a close, Priscilla, would you share with people how they might connect with you if they're, say that they're a parent that is interested in having their caregiver, or a caregiver, him or herself, that would like to inquire about your services? How do you suggest they would do that?
Well, it's pretty easy. You just have to go to info@inclusivechildcare.org, or just go to our website, inclusivechildcare.org, and you can go through Ask an Expert, which is a tab that you can ask just questions about if you're just wanting some answers that are just to specific things, and maybe you're not wanting to embark on full coaching. But if you go through that'll get you to our coaching intake. And really, it's just a matter of connecting. So parents can access us, professionals can refer families to us, they can reach out to us and ask us to, connect, so that we have a lot of avenues to make it especially easy for people to get the help they need.
Yeah, so thank you to the state for supporting you
Yes.
and your work. That's really, to me, one of the really amazing pieces of this. So I just want to thank both of you again so wholeheartedly for taking this time to talk with us today, to learn about what people may have been facing, and to be mindful of what families and kids may be facing as they look to childcare to become a part of, outside of the family, to become part of their lives and routines again.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much, and take good care.
Thank you so much, Deb. Take care.